Geofencing is awareness. It is upper funnel awareness-based strategy because that's how it's engaging with people. It's showing up on those kinds of apps, those kinds of spaces. The way people are engaging with those apps or those ads commonly are waiting for them to close those ads. I think I even read a study a while ago that the average amount of time that someone looks at a banner ad is something like 0.83 seconds. You see the ad enough amount of times, all of a sudden it's a much more trustworthy source, and that's going to hopefully drive people into that consideration to then the conversion aspect, right? Is that when they then take that experience of engaging with that ad, whether they're just simply looking at it, waiting to close it, and then when it comes time for them to go look for maybe a new apartment, a new lease to sign, they usually go and take that over to a search engine.
What we're aiming for is because they're in this location, then we can connect the dots that they could be, a really good prospect for a building.
My recommendation is, more around that $200 mark. I think that is going to give you a wider reach. It's also going to give the machine learning a lot more opportunity to kind of determine what's more qualified. What locations are getting more engagement? What should they prioritize?
All right, cool. So here with Matt Slankard, but better referred or known, not referred to as Slank, here at Digible. And this is just a continuation. I'm pretty excited about this of some, we'll call it small deep dives, if there is such a thing. I think somehow that slipped out because I was just talking about diving at the coffee shop here. For in different categories of paid media, SEO, it's kind of digital agencies, like pulling the curtain back, I'll say a little bit.
Right.
And I feel like it's fair to say now you have become the authority of geofencing at Digible.
One way or another.
Whether you were asking for that, whether you wanted it, it happened. And so really excited to get your thoughts on this topic. And I don't want to say it's a highly controversial, but it's not a non-controversial subject, just meaning, there's some anxiety just as it relates to targeting,
sure.
Around fair housing, things like that. So we won't spend too much time there, but I don't think we should breeze by it either.
Okay.
But welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And I will be calling you Slank, even though sometimes I toggle back and forth when you walk past me. Matt,
that'll be fine.
Slank.
I think you've got 140 different names to memorize. So
yeah, there's a few.
The fact that you give me two is an honor.
Okay. I'm glad you take it that way, because some people might take it another way. And first define, I think most of our listeners get it, but maybe a better way to ask this question is, instead of just defining geofencing, a lot of digital advertising is geofence to an extent.
Sure.
So people running paid search or a TikTok campaign, Spotify, and the like, are usually not targeting all of North America.
Right.
So let's use that as a jumping off point for you to kind of give us some orientation on geofencing.
Yeah, what
does it really mean?
The difference for geofencing versus some of our other services we offer, that we always do focus on geo-targeting, but geofencing is, I would say, focus on the word hyper. So what we like to do is we're focusing on very granular, specific, tangible geographical areas. So a really cool bar, a really cool park, somewhere where you are thinking that people that fit the culture and the atmosphere and the vibe of your property, I guess, where are they hanging out? We can go ahead and hyper-focus targeting that location. And I like to think of it as akin to like a digital billboard. It is very awareness focused. So not having a physical billboard there per se, but having a digital billboard there so that as people are interacting with those areas, they can be served an ad for your property later on or in the moment.
Got it. So already some questions coming out of that description or explanation. I'll start with the question around mobile, which you didn't actually use that word,
sure.
but I'm inserting it. I think a lot of people associate or think geofencing is exclusive to mobile devices. True or false?
I would say not necessarily 100% true. However, that is more often than not what it does pertain to, especially how we approach it here. So
can you specifically target only mobile devices in a geofencing campaign, or is it at the discretion of the demand side platform?
Sure. Yeah. So it's a little bit on the demand side of the platform. What we have the option to doing here is we can focus on exclusively mobile. We can focus on desktop, and we can also focus on CTV. So things like, I'm not sure necessarily if Roku's one of our partnered platforms, but things like that as well. So you can get hyper focus on those kinds of devices.
And you mentioned that it's a bit more of a digital billboard or branding mechanism. That's where it fits in, we'll say, to the proverbial marketing funnel. So therefore, what are best practices around creative? So if it's more of a branding, would you say leave out the call to action? And I mean, what are we really driving at? Is it phone calls? Is it website visits?
Yeah.
So talk to us about creative.
Never leave out the call to action. Always got to have the call to action. Call to action is, 3 words.
You get to stay employed here for another day, Matt.
3 powerful words or 2. So when it comes to creative, I think that's actually something that combined efforts from the client side with us is really going to make the best case scenario. So, if I was to ask you, what would you be more driven to click on? Would you like ads that have photos that are clearly poorly lit, taken off of an iPhone camera, or would you like a professional photographer coming in, staging a unit and making sure the bed is kept nice and there's props, if you will, like fruit bowl on the counter spaces, things like that, and that they're well lit, really kind of showing everything that your property has. So obviously we don't have a photographer at Digible to go send to all these different locations to go take those kinds of images. So that's where we try to provide that educational piece, that encouragement piece to the clients of saying, hey, if you don't have these kinds of assets, highly consider it, and then on top of that, it's also great to have that voice, but also recognizing that if the vast majority of the way that people are going to interact with these geofencing ads are on the mobile device. I mean, we see that across the board with just in general. So the way that people interact in a digital landscape is mobily. Then taking into consideration how long your ad copy is. Does it make sense to have a haiku in there, even if it's a great haiku? Probably not. But if you really quickly have a quick 3-5 word tagline that matches your brand, your voice, as well as a little short description. I always recommend with going the different floor plan spaces that are available, things like that, with that call to action text, learn more, call now, schedule a tour, apply now, things like that. That's going to be something that is going to capture the attention of someone quickly, mix that with the high quality professional imagery, and you have yourself a higher performing, better geofencing creative.
Well, let's keep going a little bit on creative. So there's limited real estate, especially on mobile. You're not going to get the same size ad units or ad types that you get on a desktop, much less on a TV, as you're even referring to, the Roku or a Hulu or streaming. And so it does, therefore, limit inherently, right, some of the options. And it sounds like you're still very much advocating for a call to action, but would you say best practice is to be featuring amenities, to be featuring, your pricing? I mean, there's some kind of, go-to, I'll say, elements of multifamily creative, and what you should be really promoting versus, things like floor plans, even helping promote the community. You were talking about the cool bar, down the street. So could you unpack a little bit more some best practices or how to better think about creative when it comes to geofencing? Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think that this really ties into kind of that relationship that we have with our clients and stuff. For instance, if there is an amenity that is all the rage, cryogenic chamber, I'm giving you one. Exactly. Having our client services team, our account managers, having those conversations with the client and trying to pull something maybe a little bit more unique that's not so kind of cookie cutter standardized in the box, downtown apartments, leasing 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms, but instead having that conversation of what do your residents really like? Maybe it's something I really enjoy when I see this on websites of, on the amenities page,
award-winning customer satisfaction, or like, something like that. Like our front leasing staff is top notch, rock solid. Because that's something that I think that as a customer, anyone can appreciate is having trust that the leasing staff, the management staff is really dialed. And I think that would be something that would cause me, if I was a prospect, to engage and go and inquire more about that property. So absolutely, I think that conversation with the client, learning more about what the unique offerings are, especially since, if we're based over here in Denver and we're creating an ad for a property in Florida, then, that open line of communication with the client is going to be essential for creating something that's going to get more engagement.
And let's now speak a little more about ad type. And it's been a few years since I've directly been involved in building a geofencing campaign, but is there still the option of like the rich media? I'll call it more intrusive, and people know what I'm talking about, but a lot has changed from kind of the advent of geofencing and mobile marketing to where we sit today. So I don't know if it's better to ask what are the constraints, but how creative can you get with location-based marketing, or when it comes to the creative? So you mentioned that video is available.
Yep.
Now I'm driving through one of these geofences. Is the video just popping up,
right,
while I'm on, maps, or while I'm doing what I shouldn't, which is looking at ESPN at a stoplight?
Exactly. Right.
So talk to us a little bit more about the ad types and when these things really are getting served.
Yeah. So these ads, first off, are getting served amongst basically partner websites. So, a lot of them are like ESPN or Weather or
ad networks, ad exchanges, reputable websites.
Yeah, exactly. And we could be talking about banner ads. We could be talking about those kinds of ads that pop up on mobile games that force you to like
watch a lot of the inventory
for
there,
5
right?
seconds and then press that X button.
Adult Swim.
Exactly. Again, and so that's really why this is one of those things that I really stress on, that geofencing is awareness. It is upper funnel awareness-based strategy. Because that's how it's engaging with people, is it's showing up on those kinds of apps, those kinds of spaces. And like you said, the way people are engaging with those apps or those ads commonly are waiting for them to close those ads. I think I even read a study a while ago that the average amount of time that someone looks at a banner ad is something like 0.83 seconds, so you see the ad enough amount of times, all of a sudden it's a much more trustworthy source. And that's going to hopefully drive people into that, consideration to then the conversion aspect, right? Is that when they then take that experience of engaging with that ad, whether they're just simply looking at it, waiting to close it, and then when it comes time for them to go look for maybe a new apartment, a new lease to sign, they usually go and take that over to a search engine, to Google. That's the most common way that people are engaging with our whole media mix. And then when our ads show up through like the search engine results, all of a sudden it's a recognizable name. So now they're a little bit more likely to engage with a website, go to them, check out the website, and then hopefully later on, or even right then and there, convert. So, and that's what we even see with the data as well is.
Well, I want to dive into that. I want to talk a little bit more about what you're starting to get at, which is how to properly measure which KPIs to be evaluating so that you know whether this geofencing campaign is worth the ROI, worth continuing to spend.
Yeah.
But just to put to bed the ad types, I don't know if this term is now antiquated or if you've heard interstitial, but of ad types that are like full screen on my phone. So I'm sitting there, let's say I'm at a dentist's office and I'm in the fence, I'm in that geography, and I've been served an ad, whether, you have the option of paying more and getting some of these bigger full screen, like more interactive ads versus just, the small banner ads that you typically see. So is that something that you would say I would steer away from that, or that's something that I very much would encourage? Like you want some of those bigger, more, intrusive sounds crappy, but
I know. Yeah.
Yeah. So, or do you think that that's not really a best practice?
What I would say to that is, we have the creative sizes that we're able to use, which are, we focus on the mobile sizes. And then it's really up to the platform at that point of like, how does it divvy up where it goes? Like, what sizes are being used? Is it that full
screen?
Full screen. I was trying to think of that word.
Yeah.
Or if it's that banner. So it's going to make that decision itself. That's like the whole machine learning AI model that it's got going on for itself. Now, I think that the argument to include geofencing in your media mix and letting it divvy that up is going to help you out with the rest of the media mix as well.
So how does that, let's now jump a little bit into measurement.
Sure.
And how to, I don't want to say defend, but know whether geofencing campaign is working or not. So you said that through reach and frequency, targeted, of course, reach and frequency, that's the whole name of the game with geofencing and location-based marketing, that if I keep serving you these mobile ads to the same person, the right person, theoretically, eventually, that's going to create that awareness so that when you are doing the shopping, that apartment, that brand, and that cryogenic chamber, are more familiar, therefore more likely to convert.
Right.
So therefore, tell me, best practice, what's the best way to evaluate, measure a geofencing campaign?
Yeah, I think that the best way is to kind of paying attention really to kind of that cost per acquisition, right? That metric. I think that that's going to be one of those ones that really tells the full story as best as we can, because it does kind of feel, especially with like geofencing, where
is acquisition a lease? Is acquisition a qualified lead? Define acquisition. Let me go
ahead and say, for the way I'm speaking towards it, is more about like a qualified lead, someone who's going to engage with enough interest and consideration with your website in the different ways that will hopefully get that person speaking with your leasing team, and then making it so that it could lead towards a lease. That's how I'm choosing to look at it in this sense. And so what we've seen, like, the preliminary data is pretty promising. So for instance, if you're looking at simply geofencing and paid search, maybe that's all you're focusing on as like, the marketing lead for.
Well, that you're saying that's my digital advertising is paid search and geofencing.
And that's it. That cost per acquisition is not as good as it can be. Let's say it like that. Now, then let's say you add paid social. That cost per acquisition starts getting a little bit lower. Now you start adding display. Now that cost per acquisition starts getting a lot lower. So now when you're mixing a very robust media mix between geofencing, paid search, paid social, and display, what our data is showing is that the CPA, cost per acquisition, for that client is significantly lower than if you're not running geofencing. If you're only running paid search, paid social, and display, or paid search and display. Adding geofencing, it's repeatable enough for us to have looked at enough examples over, trying to think of what the study that we've looked into, it's about 2 years, I think. We've seen that cost per acquisition is, I want to say off the top of my head, it's about like $7 less per acquisition. And in our industry, that $7 is pretty good. So super promising.
And I'm just going to one more time reiterate, when you say cost per acquisition, you mean
a quality lead.
A quality lead.
A quality lead. Yeah. Someone who comes in and interacts, whether they're filling a form, they're calling you, they're clicking on the apply now button on your website. Somehow they are showing interest in wanting to learn more and potentially sign a lease at your property.
Got it. And so that makes a lot of sense to me, and hopefully for many of our listeners, is that as you're adding more platforms and channels, that you're going to improve that cost per lead because they're all working together versus search working independently. And I've myself educated over the years, many marketers, it's like you can throw as much money as you want at paid search, but if you don't start including some of these other channels, you're quickly going to see diminishing returns. Hence PMAX, and what we're seeing from Google and demand gen is, and I found this super interesting, and I don't mind disclosing this, but with Digible, the first 6 months-ish that we were running PMAX, and for those that don't know that, that's essentially all of Google's inventory, and it's optimizing towards what essentially you're saying, Matt, which is conversions, like, the qualified leads. And it was a black box, and we weren't really actually seeing where those impressions were being distributed, whether it was YouTube, whether it was Gmail, whether it was display, or whether it was search. And just recently, they have started revealing where the inventory is going. And I thought it was super interesting and poignant that about 40 to 50% of the inventory was search.
Yeah.
And the other half was on all those other channels.
Yeah.
And that's all AI.
Yeah.
That is not a human that's biased or an agency saying, we got to make sure that we have a more balanced. That's all AI from Google. And it's now, I think, validating what you're saying in many ways, which is you can't just put all your money in search and get the best results. You really do actually need these other channels.
Yeah,
and
get that healthy mix.
Fits into that. So that's great.
I'm really excited about Performance Max. Actually, I'm a pretty big proponent of it.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot more I think we're starting to see, realize, and the pairing, because PMax still by itself is a few channels and it's all Google. So what pairs best is always one of the questions, and that's literally one of the next ones I was going to ask. So I don't know if you would say how much it depends versus a general good pairing with geofencing is what. So let's assume search, but are there other platforms you would say that you have noticed or, that we see a little more success with? So is it like, this is a great pair with Spotify, it's a great pair with TikTok or paid social or an email campaign? Or is that not something yet that we feel?
I think that's going to be so reliant on budget. Now, if we're going to put budget aside, what I would say is give me at least three. Give me at least three different channels that we can go ahead and incorporate here. Don't run just geofencing by itself. It's not conversion driven. Don't run geofencing and search by themselves. You really start seeing the benefits of geofencing when you add that third channel. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to say our top three best performing channels, right, is going to be geofencing, paid social, paid search. Mm-hmm. Start with that. And then if you have even more budget, add PMax. If you don't have that much budget, if we're going to now go the opposite direction and say, well, shoot, it sounds like I'm getting priced out of what Digible's offering, right? Mm-hmm. And if you only have enough budget, what I would be really curious about to see is something like along the lines of geofencing, maybe PMax together, just those two. Mm-hmm. Because, well, like you said, PMax, what we're seeing in the reporting is that a lot of that placements are on the search network, 50, 60%. Sometimes I've seen it up to 70%. So now PMax is giving us that other robust, healthy media mix, along with geofencing, which is not necessarily part of the Google network. So you're kind of getting a little bit of a wider reach outside of just being confined to the Google partnerships and networks. So that could be a really unique offering as well if your budgets are on the lower side of things, but you still want to take advantage of what we offer here.
So minimum budget, is there one, forget Digible for a second,
sure,
but that you would say, don't do this unless you at least put X amount of dollars into it? Or
for geofencing?
Yeah. Could you get away with a $50 geofencing campaign?
Yeah. Yeah, you can. I would say that my recommendation is, more around that $200 mark. I think that is going to give you a wider reach. It's also going to give the machine learning a lot more opportunity to kind of determine what's more qualified, what locations are getting more engagement, what should they prioritize. You know what I'm saying? So like if it only has so much budget per day to try to get impressions served out there, the machine learning is going to start to identify what's going to work really well. So we can talk a little bit about this is, something that we like to focus on is our competitors, or are the competitors of a property, along with like places of interest or employers. Now, let's go ahead and say that there's a park that has a free concert every Monday night, mm-hmm. and you put that up against a competitor property. That competitor property is not going to have nearly as many available impressions to serve to than that park. Now you start to have a lower budget. The machine learning is going to say, we're just going to forget about that competitor location because you just don't have enough budget. And we're going to just put all of your minimal budget towards this park because we know that there's available impressions there. So when you increase your budget, you start to kind of give that machine a little bit more opportunity to try to reach those smaller markets. But ideally, by us targeting those competitors, we can try to find those more qualified leads, people who are coming in touring that property who might be interested in looking. Maybe someone's leases are ending and they're frustrated with how they've been treated at that property. So we still want to reach those competitors, but we also want to try to reach that cool park that's having those fun concerts as well.
Interesting, for sure. So if I have $1,000 geofencing budget, which is 5x what you said, it might be a typical budget or starting point of just a couple $100. Is there a way that you back into then how many fences? So we haven't gotten to that, but let's get to it now. Yeah. It's not as simple, because you were just mentioning the use case of like the park plus the competitor. Mm-hmm. But if you don't have enough budget, then maybe you just put all of it in one fence. So how do you, on a budget of $1,000, would you say I'm going to break that into 3 fences versus 10 fences?
It would probably, in order for the budget to fully spend in 1 month, it would probably require 10 or more fences, depending on how dense that population is. So while we're setting up the campaigns, we have tools that tells us like a guesstimate of how many available impressions are there. Mm-hmm. So we can know pretty early if we're going to need more locations based off of the budget, based off the amount of impressions we're trying to purchase. And that's when we start to pull some different levers. We can increase the radius size of said fences, right? So we always like to start off with a radius size of around 250 meters, and then we go from there, whether we need to shrink that or increase that. The other option then, of course, is we can also shift some of the budget so that when someone's been in the fence, but maybe they're just living in the moment and they're not on their phone and they're engaging with the world around them, but then they go home later and they start doom scrolling. Well, we still want to capture that person, even though they were at that concert, and we can serve that ad to them later after they leave that fence. That's how we do retargeting for geofencing. And there's always a lot more available impressions there. So we can start shifting budget more towards the retargeting campaign. And we see a way higher performance and click-through rate when it comes to the retargeting campaign than the in-the-person one. Back to your example of at the red light, and you see what'd you call that chamber? The property that's got your cool chamber that heals all your wounds, whatever.
Yeah, the cryogenic chamber.
But
I'm stopped at the light and I'm glancing at ESPN again, which I shouldn't be. I just actually got a speeding ticket and was doing driver's ed, and was reminded that. But you're saying that
you're not going to
caught me for a moment, and I'm not going to engage. However, I entered the fence that then triggered for us, hey, this might be a valuable prospect.
Yeah.
And then you got me on the couch later that night.
Doom scrolling. Boom. We got you. So that's where we can shift some budget there to try to make it so that we're serving all $1,000. And then the other thing that we can do is go back to the client, work with them and say, hey, we're going to need some more locations. This is a little bit, this is back to putting some work back on the client side. So that's kind of where maybe they're super engaged and they get back to us within that day and they're like, awesome, here's 10 more locations. Sometimes they're a little slower to that because maybe it's a little tiring to think of like, where do I want to target? I think that's like an opportunity for the research side and how AI can be of a tool to just kind of spark your creativity and just look to see what places are trending in your local area so that you can efficiently come up with more fence location ideas without having to really, really sit and rake your brain over it.
Well, this does get us, and for the sake of time too, we won't do a deep dive on fair housing, but as just going a little bit further with what you were just describing of, hey, we need to look at some other opportunities, some other fences. And you started the podcast talking about like the cool bar, like, what would appear to be lookalike audiences, that with current residents or what they're targeting.
Right.
So how do you navigate that where it's like, hey, we need a few more fences, and then you're dealing with a marketer that actually isn't local, which is super common, and they're like, I don't live in that zip code, I don't even live in that city, so I'm not really sure, Matt, which other fences to give. But what I can tell you is we want somebody that is a young professional that's making $100,000 or more, and leans, democratic.
Sure.
That's not okay.
Yeah.
So talk to us about how you're identifying the fences, how you kind of are navigating some of the very important laws in this industry.
Okay. Let me preface that I'm not a lawyer.
All right, let's stop let's stop right now.
But what I would say is that what I would say is a reason why we're not as concerned with a reason why we're not as concerned with geofencing and like fair housing is because we're not really excluding anyone. We're adding places, but we're not excluding. And because those locations are usually very small, like a very small little radius, we're not purposely like adding, do not target these locations, I guess. And I think that that's pretty much what I've seen on the material about it. Also, the platform that we use, they make sure that they identify sensitive locations, and that automatically gets excluded. So like children's hospitals, things like that, that immediately is a no-go from the platform that we use. And yeah, I think that just having that diversity, there's no way to prevent anyone from walking into a fence, right? So there's no one there, I guess, to say like, sorry, you don't fit the bill. Mm-hmm. You're not welcome to come into this fence. Anyone can walk through a fence technically. So that fence is all inclusive.
Well, it makes sense to me, but I think maybe the important thing is that for us, it's more like location shows intent. And so we're not, it might be psychographic targeting that we weave into mm-hmm. a geofencing campaign, but it is not based on how much somebody makes or, who they're voting for.
Right.
Obviously their ethnicity or anything like that. To your point, that's would be difficult to control anyways. But what we're aiming for is because they're in this location, then we can connect the dots that they could be, a really good prospect,
right?
For a building. I want to come back briefly to the reporting and the measurement. So makes a lot of sense, and we talked, about PMEX is almost validating that, kind of full funnel approach, and geofencing is one of the mechanisms to drive that. But what about the campaign data itself? Should I be paying attention to click-throughs, like click-through rate, number of clicks, like before you move me to like cost per acquisition and like kind of the full picture? Because one of the things that I know, again, early days, but I don't feel like it's, no longer, I guess, a measurement or a factor, is can you say, hey, that person is now on site? Is there any kind of like match back or more direct attribution where it's like we're serving them on a phone and now that phone is at your property?
Yes. I'll preface this by saying that that's like a fun little extra thing. I wouldn't say that that's something that we want to like use as like a direct measurable of a success. There's a couple reasons for that. Let's say you have an apartment in downtown Chicago. Your leasing office is right off of like a main street, one of the main streets. It's no issue to get impressions served to any of those fences in Chicago. And then the likelihood of someone just walking through that small attribution fence to count as a walk-in, that's how we refer to it in our reporting. They can pass through that fence, boom, counts as a walk-in. They might not have walked through the door. So there's a little bit of a grain of salt with that. So we do see with like heavily dense urban areas, really inflated numbers with that. And there's nothing we can do to control that.
Yep.
And then in the less dense areas, those numbers are oftentimes, on the smaller side, a couple a month, which is not bad. That's still a really, really high quality potential conversion metric that we're reporting on. So if you're getting 3 walk-ins from a very, very specific awareness campaign, that's fantastic. I think about like, maybe this is like a Denver joke, but like, do you know who Frank Azar is?
Yes.
Have you ever called Frank Azar?
No.
Exactly.
I hope I never do.
No, but you know them by name because his billboards are everywhere.
Yeah.
So that's where, again, just to bring back the point that geofencing is your digital billboard.
Yep. No, it's great. Probably last question for me, but it's almost like a myth buster, and I don't know if you feel comfortable answering this, but what level of precision can you confidently speak to or say a geofencing campaign, is it 5 meters? Is it 10 meters? Is it 100 meters? So you were saying 250 is a good best practice as far as the fence itself.
Yeah,
but, if I wanted to, could I geofence to you right now because you're sitting next to me?
Yeah. You want some sci-fi?
Yeah, people get really excited about this.
It's got a satellite pinging down on my location.
Yeah. And for those that don't know, towers are just one part of it, but there's kind of a triangulation that often happens that serves this inventory. And the more app-based, the more accurate it is. But that being said, if it's like, hey, within 10 meters, am I getting too precise here?
It won't even let you do it.
Okay.
100 meters is our, I think it's 100, might be 125, but I believe it's 100 meters is our limit for how small we can go.
Okay. Well, there you have it.
Yeah.
No, I don't know if it was a myth dispelled or busted, but for those thinking 5-10 meters, not possible.
Yeah. You cannot target a very specific aisle in a store.
Yeah.
I want people who specifically go and buy that very, very high-end perfume. Can't do it.
Well, anything else for us before we let you go, Slank, that you think's important or advice that you would give to a multifamily marketer related to geofencing?
I think the last closing marks is not so much of the metrics base. I think this is more anecdotal. But one of the things that I've noticed with geofencing, especially from interacting with our clients, is that it's one of the things that they have the most fun with. I think that in the digital landscape there is, if we're to sit here and talk about Google Ads, we can get lost in the weeds pretty quickly. And there's going to be a lot of I don't knows. There's new updates coming out all the time. With geofencing, there's something that kind of brings you back to this very beginning, very easy thing, and that is its tangible locations. Reid, if you wanted to target the Chick-fil-A down the street, we can target that Chick-fil-A down the street. Mm-hmm. If you wanted to target this spot, this spot, this spot, cool, we can do that. And what I've noticed is I think that level of engagement doesn't take too much effort. And therefore, both marketing leads and ownership groups tend to kind of have a little bit more fun with it because of that reason, is they get to pick and choose very hyper-specific locations. So I think that that's one of the things that is definitely worth talking about when it comes to geofencing.
No, that's great. And I do think that makes it easier for the marketer, but also even an owner who's like, hey, we have fenced, we're serving ads over these commercial, buildings, or sister properties, but it's just, as you said, much easier to understand than kind of I don't want to call it the black box, but the complexity of Google and search campaigns. But that does trigger one other question. Can you...
This is the last question.
This is the last question.
Maybe. Okay.
Is if you were like, yeah, we're gonna fence Chick-fil-A, could I then say, well, I want to target Chick-fil-A with TikTok or with Spotify or with paid social or with search? Or would you say that's not possible?
I would say, let me look into it and confirm that. But from my understanding is not to the extent that we're talking about right now. I think that there might be some unique ways to create some audiences based off of it for some of those other platforms, but it's not as much of an easy as of a click of a button.
Yeah. Well, and I think my answer would be somewhat similar, but the inventory on Spotify, on TikTok, and some of the other platforms, sans Google, which Google is providing a lot of the inventory that is happening on geofencing. So for those that don't know, there's all these big ad exchanges and networks, and that's where all this display inventory, whether it's on a mobile device or on a desktop, is actually, that's all the piping. But that's why you couldn't say TikTok on that Chick-fil-A. You may not serve an impression for, right. These days you probably actually would get some impressions, but it still might take a long time to get to a meaningful amount.
Exactly.
Versus in the mobile sphere, which is where you said a lot of this inventory lives, there's still tons of inventory, so you could actually get some decent volume at a Chick-fil-A.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, I had I do have 10 other questions, but I'm going to spare you today because I think this is a good one to pick up as we get deeper and deeper. Just want to keep kind of peeling back some of these platforms and hopefully giving some people some better strategies and ideas how to approach this stuff.
Okay. We're not going to take any calls from listeners or anything right now?
Not at this moment.
No one refuting me?
I see David is on the line, and I think we're just going to avoid that one.
That sounds like a good call.
That could be trouble. All right. Well, thanks, Slank.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right.